Christos anesti negrum fanato
Herman from Protecting Veil. I'm joined this evening by Father Basil of Holy Cross Monastery in West Virginia, and renowned church designer, Orthodox church designer Andrew Gould, for a conversation about the ongoing temple building project that they've had at Holy Cross Monastery, and which Andrew designed. And so we talked about looking at the building process, the design process, and kind of both the practical and kind of theoretical questions involved in that. Father Basil, wanted to start by talking about the initial impetus for the building of the church. What was the original impetus?
Yeah, well, I think the idea that we need a new church has been, it's been on our mind for a long time. So it's been a long time coming. But really, the most immediate impetus is simply the fact that we don't have room in our current church. The current monastery church building was constructed based on the building pattern of a three-car garage, slightly modified. And Father Seraphin likes to say that when they first finished it, he thought, well, there's no way we'll ever be able to fill all of this space. But over the years, an addition was added in the back of the church to make room for the increasing number of guests, that lay people that were visiting. And now we've just simply reached the point where the size of the brotherhood and the number of pilgrims and the handful of laity that also attend services regularly from the area there's not enough room in our church and in our trapeza, the dining area. So that immediate kind of practical need is what got us into this project to begin with.
And what exactly is it that's being built in addition to the temple? If I recall, there's a building that's opposite the temple that will be the new refectory. Is that right?
Actually, the refectory is going to be in the basement of the structure.
Oh, okay. So that's it's both those things.
Correct.
Yeah. And have you had to, as a monastery, to slow down? I know sometimes there's a limit on the number of novices that you can take, and so on. I guess, has that been an issue?
We're bumping into that hard limit right now. We have a couple of young men who are scheduled to come in the next few months. And I think that's pretty much going to fill up our available housing at the moment. But even if we had more housing right now, we really couldn't accommodate more people regularly in the church and in the trapeza. So before we can even think about additional housing to accommodate an expanding brotherhood, we have to get this church built first. So
Yep. So it's an existential.
Yes, it is. Yeah.
Andrew, I wanted to ask, kind of follow up on that, to go kind of more deeply into the specifics of your vision for the temple when you were approached. I guess you could maybe begin by talking about how long it's been since you were first approached, and then how you came about your vision, your design for the new temple.
Well, when the monastery approached me a few years back, it was a very interesting brief because they being a ROCOR monastery, they wanted something with clear Russian Orthodox roots, sort of a, a Russian kind of canonical ethos behind the church. But they also, being an English-speaking monastery that's almost all American converts, Father Seraphim wanted something that was expressive of American construction traditions, craft traditions, and expressive of the Appalachian location of the monastery. And, that I interpreted that a couple of ways. Russian architecture tends towards the complicated and the ornate. Although if you look back at very early Russian architecture, Russian churches from 12th, 13th century, there's a lot more clarity and simplicity to the church design. And because American architectural heritage and American culture in general tends towards the practical and the straightforward. I was looking at those more medieval Russian precedents for the styling of the church, something relatively clear, clear and straightforward in a geometrical sense, not heavily ornamented, but sort of hearty and robust in terms of its use of materials. That tends to be what makes architecture look American as opposed to European. And then in terms of Appalachian influences specifically, just the way it meets the earth, it's built up at the end of a holler into sloping ground, making it a multi-story church that has a walkout basement, is quite an American way of handling a building. It worked well on their topography. Like you'd never see that in Russia. Russia doesn't hardly ever have any, sloping grade where a church would have a walkout basement in that sense. And then the use of timber framing. We have a long tradition of construction of barns and of church roofs and of porches in timber frame in America and particularly in Appalachia. So, when I suggested having a wraparound porch made out of timber frame, everyone reacted like, yeah, that sounds Southern, that sounds American, that's perfect. But when I suggested doing the entire roof of the church in exposed timber frame, that people liked that idea. On the one hand, it gives a connection to early Christian architecture, the early Christian basilicas, were built that way, but it also gives a connection to just sort of typical American church building practices. Almost any town in America will have Protestant or Catholic churches that have masonry walls and a timber frame roof. It's kind of by far the most typical way Americans have always built churches. It's entirely not the case in Russia. I don't know of any Russian churches that have an exposed timber frame roof. Of course, there's some in Greece, typically either the very old ones or the very modern ones. But to make a fusion of Russian Orthodox architecture with that kind of timber roofed basilica style of construction, that's something quite new, something you don't see in the historic record. And that's what really excites me as a church designer, is the opportunity to do something new. I would hate to be asked to just do like a typical Russian church that looks just like it's in Russia, because there's 30,000 beautiful churches in Russia, and how am I going to come up with something new? If I have to compete with that. But blending Russian architecture with American architecture, that's not been done very many times, and I can come up with something that really is quite special and new.
Yeah. Is there anything else about the building that sets it apart from maybe other projects that you've had from other Orthodox churches in America?
Well, the monastic program was unique. They Father Seraphim kind of specified that he wanted the monastic seating areas to be fairly separated from the area of the nave where the public would be, so that the monks have their privacy during services. But on the other hand, the bishop had specified that the public do need to be able to come forward and venerate the icons on the central analoi and approach the iconostasis and the relics and so forth. And at the same time, we needed somewhere for the choirs. And, unlike in a Greek monastic church where the singers tend to be kind of central in the church, in a Russian monastic church, the singers tend to be all the way to the east, right up against the iconostasis on the left and the right, and usually kind of behind a bit of a screen wall, like some high backs to see or some big framed kiosks. The singers will usually kind of have their own place on the kleros up there. So I came up with a floor plan that achieved all of those things, that has the monastic seating in the transepts, and the transepts are somewhat separated from the western part of the nave by high backs to Scythia. And then there's yet another space to the east of the transepts, which are the cleroi, separated with a column and an arch, and some more high backs to Scythia, so that the two choirs again have their own space up a step from the rest of the monastic seating. But then the whole central axis of the church, east to west, is open in the center, so that the people who are coming in the west door, the public, can go up to the front of the church, venerate the icons, and then step backwards back into the western part of the nave. And then at the end of the service, the monastics will be able to exit directly out of side doors from the transepts, whereas the public will exit out of the west door. And then furthermore, there's a balcony in the west, so that if it's a day with a very high attendance on the part of the public, there'll be overflow space where people can go upstairs. And likewise, the big west doors can be opened and people can stand out on the porches and look in through the doors. So the church has a lot of programmatic complexity, a lot more going on than a parish church, for instance, would have.
Sure. The a lot of the other questions that I had for both you and for Father Basil are more theoretical, I guess, talking about church architecture generally, and just the importance of beauty. Obviously, there's a lot of energy and effort and money put into creating a space that is set apart and has a spiritual purpose. So could you talk to the spiritual purpose of beauty in the context of the liturgical arts and maybe church architecture in particular?
Well, the architecture is just one element, of course, of that houses all of these aspects of beauty, the iconography, the chanting, the incense, everything that is there to sort of reach our senses and lift our hearts and our minds towards Christ. It's kind of, I think, before I was Orthodox, I always really had a very strong connection to physical beauty, aesthetic beauty, I guess you might say. And so it always felt very natural, and it made so much sense to me that in Orthodoxy, there's this emphasis on the way that we can access, truth and beauty through the senses. That it's not this. It's not just a earthly sensual thing, that when we make use of God's gifts properly, we're actually the world around us is transfigured. And I think in my fairly limited experience, but I have had the chance to travel some in Russia and to see some of these magnificent examples of church art and architecture, and you immediately feel this sense. I think probably the church that had the most immediate impact on me was there's a naval cathedral in Kronstadt that's very much modeled on the Hagia Sophia. It's just this massive open space, and just we were there for one of the evening services, and just all of the reverberation in the church and the iconography, mosaics, and well, actually, I think it was mostly just painted frescoes, stonework, just all this beauty surrounding you. It just was overwhelming. You feel like it's heaven on earth. It's what the Vladimir's emissaries said of the original Hagia Sophia. And so I think it's been really inspiring to see our church sort of rise from the ground. When they finished the arches and all the pillars inside, when they got the timber framing roof in there, it just, I think in our own modest, small way, we're, carrying on that tradition here and building another, little piece of heaven on earth.
Yeah.
That's a good way to put it. I mean, Orthodox architecture very overtly seeks to represent the kingdom of God on earth, much more so than Western church architecture. Western church architecture tends to sort of read as an offering of the things of earth up to heaven, earth pointing upward, whereas Orthodox churches sort of more seem like, the dome of heaven lowered down onto us, heaven coming down to us. And in the liturgical aesthetic of Orthodoxy, when we're in church, we are already in heaven, and so we paint the saints all around us, and we fill the church with, sort of continuous, uninterrupted singing, in a reverberant space that just makes you feel like you're completely surrounded by the choir of angels. And then we paint God, Christ Pantocrator, at the top of the dome as the sort of heavenly conductor, guiding this symphony of cosmic order around us. And so everything about Orthodox liturgical art seeks to express that sort of superordinate concept of order, and that's almost as close as you can get to almost a definition of beauty. Beauty is the well-orderedness of things, and the entire structure of Orthodox liturgy doesn't really make any sense if the space is not intensely beautiful and beautifully ordered and beautifully crafted. You're not going to get a sense of stepping out of earth and into heaven if the building seems mundane or chaotic, undesigned, unintentional.
Yeah. And I guess related to that is the sense of authenticity.
I think one area in which the concept of authenticity is helpful in architecture is that different materials have their own sort of rational expression in terms of how they're crafted. So, arches kind of belong to masonry because, masonry is good in compression, and clearly if you're building out of brick or stone and you want to span an opening, an arch is the way that brick and stone lend themselves to doing that. Whereas if you're building out of wood and you need to span something, building beams and trusses out of straight segments of wood is the natural way to do that. And if you're working with metal, you're going to make something that's kind of thin and light and open filigree, because metal is very strong and it's very expensive by volume, and it's very heavy. So, metal work tends to be, light and lacy, whereas, masonry tends to be massive and heavy. So, what I would kind of judge to be inauthentic with construction is when you see buildings being built, sort of looking like one craft tradition, but actually being built in a completely different craft tradition with a different material. When you see an Orthodox church being built to look like it's sort of Byzantine architecture and it's all arches and vaults, but it's all being framed in steel and then covered over with sheetrock. One tends to feel like it's only superficially following the tradition of Byzantine architecture. It's not actually faithful to the material logic that gave rise to Byzantine architecture in the first place. So, which I think is disappointing. It's kind of treating architecture as like a stage set, and sometimes you have to do some of that, just because there are constraints and structural realities of modern building, and not always is it practical to build everything the medieval way. However, I feel like at least the fundamental concept of the building should at least be a structurally rational expression, and that's what I was trying to do with our monastery church here. Is that fundamentally, the load-bearing walls and the big arches and the big columns are masonry, and they're actually functioning as arches and columns the way a masonry building does. And then the timber elements, the roofs and the porches are trusses, they're straight lines and they're triangles and they're timber joinery, and they are structurally functioning, the way beams and timbers structurally function. And so fundamentally, the building is an honest and authentic expression of how the materials are used. And that means that I'm very happy to share pictures of the building under construction. Even under construction, it looks real and beautiful, and people are inspired by it, which is not usually the case with modern church construction. Usually, the construction pictures are kind of an embarrassment of, light gauge steel and ductwork and cables, and and it doesn't actually look like a church until the last minute, and you kind of want to hide those pictures.
I have noticed that I think you've probably shared more photos of this church build than maybe almost any other.
Yeah.
Yeah, thanks to God.
Well, I think, just to kind of bounce off of that a little bit, it's certainly just, being close by and watching it come together, piece by piece, day by day. It was really, I was going back through for our newsletter in the summer, and looking at the construction photos that we had sent out in the February newsletter. And at that point, they had just finished maybe the eastern and western walls, and so even in just a matter of months, they had poured the central columns and installed the arches, and created this really unique interior space. It has these thick concrete, it has a physical presence to it, this kind of monumental quality, that it just you naturally can sense it when you're in the presence of something like that. And then over the summer, really just blindingly quickly in the span of about 2 weeks, this group of, like, I don't know, 7 or 8 Mennonite young men, I know they must not have been more than like 20, uh, installed all of the timber porch and the timber frame roof in 2 weeks. They spent a week on the porch and a week on the roof, and working almost 12-hour days. And it just seemed like overnight, um, it added this element of warmth and a very kind of open, welcoming quality to it. Of course, porches are gathering places, and it just really brought the structure to life. So I think, um, when people come and see this structure in person, I think they'll very, they may not be able to articulate it as clearly and precisely as Andrew just did, but it's something that you can kind of sense instinctively, I think, even if you don't quite have the technical vocabulary to express it.
Yeah. How do you see the effect of having this remarkable church being built in their midst?
Well, of course, we have connections in the local community already. It's hard not to stand out, when you have to go grocery shopping or go to the doctor, or whatever it is, that we have to do in our interactions with the world. But I think, uh, as folks have gotten around here, have gotten to know the monks, that there is a monastery, the reaction and the response is almost universally a very positive one. And they understand that we believe in Jesus, and that we'll pray for them, and we will show them hospitality when they come here. And I think, certainly my hope is that, especially as poor as our state is, and in our surrounding area, that having something like this, something so sort of out of the ordinary, will really be kind of a source of inspiration and hope. That it's like, there's so many kind of negative impressions that people have of West Virginia and Appalachia, especially in the national press, you might say. But it's like, look what can be done. Look what can be done in this place. And I think that's something that not just Orthodox, but all West Virginians of all kind of confessions can draw inspiration from.
Yeah. Yeah. Andrew, I imagine you've been up there to have a look at how things are going, or do you plan to go up there anytime soon?
Well, I was there a couple of months ago, while they were installing the timbers. Yeah, and that was a amazing process to behold. Yeah, I hope to go up there in another month or so. Once the windows are going in, and maybe the plaster getting underway. Yeah, it's very exciting to me to see this.
The timber crew, had you worked with them before?
No, not at all. When I build buildings, either my own parish church, or more houses here in my own city in Charleston, South Carolina, I have the luxury of kind of managing the construction sites myself to an extent, and just kind of telling people what to do. but that's not practical without a state project. So, in this case, I just draw everything in great detail. I sent the timber company many pages of detailed drawings that show every little profile of every little part. And then they sent me back 3D computer modeled shop drawings that I could carefully review and make sure everything was right. And it really worked perfectly. I mean, they brought down truckloads and truckloads of pre-cut wooden parts, and they all pieced together and fit the masonry structure really, really, really exactly.
Beautiful. And has the project been pretty much moving forward at the rate that it was supposed to? Or I think there was probably during COVID, as with most things, some issues, but is it on schedule more or less?
Well, the nice thing about this project is it doesn't really have a schedule. If theoretically a construction project could move faster, but of course the monastery is sort of paying as they go and fundraising as they go. So, it seems to my eyes it's been working out that, the pace at which construction is plugging along is, roughly corresponding to the pace at which fundraising money is coming in, and so we wouldn't want it to go a whole lot faster or slower, I think, under the circumstance. What do you think, Father Basil?
Well, thank God we haven't had to stop. I think that's the important thing. Just given all of the economic uncertainties that the pandemic, I don't know, either created or exacerbated. It has been kind of a safer bet for us and the contractor to do the kind of the pay as you go approach. But our fundraising is ongoing, and I think pretty soon we're going to have to turn our attention to fundraising for the kind of the interior beautification process, because the exterior structure itself is rapidly approaching I mean mostly complete state. So
Excellent. Well, maybe when it comes time for the beautification of the interior, we can have another conversation. You can tell us more about. We can once you've decided on an iconography system and so on, and iconographers and so on. How can people support this work, Father?
well, donate. Go to our website and donate. That's the simplest thing. Of course, we also appreciate people's prayers. I hope that because our any monastery really is it's there for the monks. Of course, it's there for monastics to work out their own repentance and salvation, but it's also a ministry that touches the lives of people all over the country, and certainly in our case. It's there for the Orthodox people of this country, and so we hope that it means something to as many people as possible, that it's not just this random project in the middle of nowhere in a holler, but that people will feel connected to it, and hope that it's there for them as well. And we'll see how long the space that we have for laity will be sufficient as the monastery continues to grow. we'll see. You know, this is really, we have 180 acres of land, but the amount of usable flat land within that is very minimal. So this is pretty much our one shot to get it right.
In what just yeah, what is the occupancy?
I think it's 50 monastics and 150 laity. Is that right, Andrew?
Yeah, something along those lines.
But
Well,
we also have the, as Andrew said, the, you know, the porch space. You know, the doors can be opened up, and so, you know, usually before we started the construction process, we were hosting a kind of an annual pilgrimage the Sunday after the exaltation, which was a patronal feast, and so we hope to resume that once the church is complete, and you know, plan to be able to accommodate all of our pilgrims in the new church, rather than having to put up tents and do outdoor services and things like that. So.
right. Well, I will certainly put a link to the donation page under the video, so those folks watching who can are inspired to help out, please do so. And if you haven't visited St. Holy Cross yet, I definitely recommend it. I've been quite a few times, and it's definitely a treasure of Orthodoxy in America. So we're excited to see the growth, and it's encouraged by it. So.